finish this up here. I have a feeling for most of y'all we've understood this so far, yes? Writing the equation line, those of you who weren't here don't know what we're talking about too much. Understood it from the video somewhat. So, looking at this here, the graph shows the distance Allison hikes in X hours. Write an equation of the line and interpret the slope. How long does it take Allison to hike 14 miles traveling at the same rate? So the first thing we need to do is write the equation of a line. Now there's two ways we can write an equation of a line, or write it out. One of them was what? Y equals mx plus b. The other one was y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. These were our two equations. Now, we really haven't used the second equation, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. I would really use this one here if I did not have the y-intercept. If I didn't know what the y-intercept was, then I would be more inclined to use that one. So when I look at this here, do we know what the y-intercept is? It is what? 0, 0 is the y-intercept. So the value of b in our equation is 0. Which makes sense for this problem here. Because if we're talking about someone that is hiking or running or starting anything like this here, well, their distance traveled has to start at 0. Because if I'm going to start a journey, anybody starts a journey, well, our starting point would be 0 miles, yes? Because we're 0 miles away from where we started. Now we just need to find the slope. Slope. So slope is rise over run, or y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So which one do we want to do? Do the rise going up and over, or do we want to do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1? So our y values are what? What's our other y value? Because that's the only true point we have. We can try to see here, when we look at the line, as I'm going along this line, I don't see any spots that match up at that nice cross point. Even 7,24.5 never really crosses up there. The next one that might cross up nicely is up here. But since I have 0, 0, I'm going to use that. Now the x values I have would be 7 and 0. But what number would go first, 7 or 0? Yes. This one here is one of the few equations that you've probably dealt with so far where we have the x1, x2, y1, y2, where order matters. If you remember back to the distance formula, how we ordered x and y, x1, x2, y1, y2 really didn't matter. We talked about midpoint, x1, x2, y1, y2. The order didn't matter. Here it does. Well, 24.5 minus 0 is just 24.5. 7 minus 0 is 7. Now, one of the things in mathematical etiquette, we do not leave a decimal in a fraction. We don't do that. It's just they don't work. We're either going to have it as a decimal or as a fraction with whole numbers. I can't have a decimal in there. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to simplify it. I'll just plug it into a calculator, 24.5 over 7, or 24.5 divided by 7. And have it simplify that down, because there's a chance it could be a simpler fraction. 5 over 7. And what this reduces to is 3.5. 3.5. Now, if we want to change that into a fraction, we can. It would be 7/2. So our slope is either 3.5 or 7/2, because I can rewrite that as a fraction. Any questions on anything we've done so far? Hopefully this is reminding you all a lot of Algebra 1 stuff. Yes. So what would our equation be here? Y equals what? Huh? Yes. So there's actually one thing we can drop on this. We can drop the plus 0. Because it really doesn't add anything to the equation, so we can drop it. We don't need it. We just have it as y equals 7/2 x. Another way we could rewrite this or write it was be y equals 3.5x. We can use the fraction or the decimal. They're interchangeable. Huh? Unfortunately, I can't surfboard, so about as close as I'll get. So we wrote the equation. Now we need to do what? Interpret the slope. So 7/2, 7 over 2. What does that tell me? Or 3.5. So 7 is our what? Distance, and 2 is our time. So what? For every... So let's flip it, because that sounds a little weird, doesn't it? For every 7 miles, it takes 2 hours, or... So... if we were using for every 2 hours, she travels 7 miles. Now, we could do it the other way. We could rewrite it the other way, but I wouldn't start with 4. Let's see here. It takes her, so for every 2 hours she travels, or it takes her, yeah, for every 2 hours she travels 7 miles. That's still funky. That's still a weird way to phrase it. You don't have to erase it if you don't want. Because again, that is saying what it is, isn't it? It just doesn't sound right. It takes her 2 hours to travel 7 miles. Mm-hmm. Yes. So however we want to phrase it, as long as it's relating that statement of the fact that for every 2 hours she's traveling 7 miles. Or it takes her 2 hours to travel 7 miles. If she's traveled 7 miles, it's taken her 2 hours. Just something relating that 2 hours and the 7 miles together. So we've interpreted the slope. What's the last thing? How long does it take Allison to hike 14 miles traveling at the same rate? Takes her 4 hours. So we could use an equation to solve this, but what do we know? It takes her 2 hours to travel 7 miles. So 14 would be what? 7 times 2, or 7 plus 7. So if we had 2, it's now what? 4. Because the other way we could have done this is set it up like this here, and then what? Divided both sides by 7/2. Well, these will cancel, leaving me with x, and this ends up being 4. So 4 hours. It'll take her 4 hours. Any questions on this here? We good, Lexi? We good, Eric? Yeah, some of this in Algebra 1 geometry, we did some of this. So some of this stuff repeats.